Good afternoon, everyone. Let's make a start. Welcome to our webinar, the first of our Think Beyond events, which are targeted at the public sector. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Rob, and I'm a principal at Gate One. I've got a background in the public sector, local government, healthcare, and central government. If this is your first time with us at Gate One, it's great to have us. We're an award-winning change and transformation consultancy supporting clients with complex change across digital, strategy, people change, and operating model. Our topic today is place leadership, and we're going to be thinking beyond our organization and considering place leadership and the role of place leaders. These extraordinary and challenging times have brought into sharper focus the need to work across partner organizations to protect communities and to protect our local economies. But what does it really mean to be a place leader right now, and how are organizations balancing the immediate pressures, particularly around COVID, whilst maintaining their ambition and their focus on the longer term? I am delighted to be joined by our panel today. We've got Josie Ragg, Chief Executive at Slough Borough Council, one of our clients. Josie has been the Chief Executive at Slough for over 2 years and was previously with Wokingham Borough Council, where she held several senior roles. And we have Nick Hennell, a partner at Gate One, who leads our public sector business. Nick has many years' experience supporting clients and executive leaders across a range of sectors and industries, with a particular focus on healthcare and local government. In terms of our agenda and how we're going to run today, we've got a number of set questions which I'll be putting to our panelists, and we will also have time for Q&A. If you have any questions for Nick and Josie, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and we'll do our best to answer them. We'll try and finish in good time too, to give a little bit of a breather before your next meetings, no later than 12:45. So, Nick and Josie, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. Josie, we've got attendees joining from all over the country. So are you able to tell us a little bit more about Slough, those who might not be quite so familiar with it?
With pleasure. There's nothing I like talking about more than Slough and place. So firstly, it's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm really grateful to Gate One for facilitating the opportunity for public sector professionals to discuss place. But in terms of Slough itself, well, it's certainly unique, that's for sure. And as you said, Rob, in your introduction, I've been at Slough for just over 2 years now, and every day something surprises me about this place. But in terms of its geography, it's 25 miles sort of west of central London, so we're right on the doorstep of London. We're in the east of Berkshire, but probably associated more with London demographics than with Berkshire demographics. In terms of, and what makes us quite unique in lots of different ways is where we're placed geographically and the transport infrastructure that supports Slough. So we're right bang in the middle of the M4, M40, M25. We've got Crossrail coming when it comes, and it will be coming, which means 5 minutes into London. So we've got Heathrow right on our doorstep, and when expansion comes, a good number of our population are employed and usefully employed at Heathrow as well, and some of the sort of feeder industry around that. Very, very small though, compact urban environment. So 7x3 geographically, which is, I think the second or third smallest geographic unitary authority in the country. But crikey, it packs a lot into this space, that's for sure. But if you'll just allow me to just say something about Slough, because it's quite it's a place of two halves in a way. And when I say that, what I mean is there are some anomalies around Slough. So on the one hand, we've got this fantastic gift of proximity to London, transport infrastructure, really, really well placed in terms of regeneration, and we can pick up some of that a little bit later. We've got the largest privately owned industrial estate in Europe, Segro, right in Slough. We've got the most productive area in the country. So all these fantastic things, if you read Centre for City reports, you'll see all of these statistics sort of churning out around Slough's productivity. And yet, the other half of Slough is an interesting dynamic in its own right. We have the lowest healthy life expectancy, in the southeast. Adult mortality around air quality is the second highest in the southeast, and over half of our neighbourhoods are in the most deprived, the indices of multiple deprivation, so lowest in the country across that as well. And so in terms of healthy life expectancies and outcomes and how people live their lives, there's this sort of anomalous part of Slough, and then this fantastic part of Slough. And our job, I think, as place leaders in Slough is to make that work for everybody in Slough. And that's one of the reasons why at the end of last year, we developed our inclusive growth strategy, because as we're developing £3 billion worth of investment in the town centre, we don't want it just to be shiny for people who are maybe potentially moving out of London. We want it to be there for everybody. And we want it to address some of those real inequalities that I talked about as well. So unique, a place of two halves, and with some challenges, but by golly, some opportunities as well. I hope that gives a bit of a flavour of what it's like here in Slough.
Thanks, Josie. So in terms of the challenges that you've outlined, who are your key partners, and how do you them to deliver on the outcomes beyond your organisation as a local authority?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good question. And the question of partnership is one that's really, really close to our hearts in Slough as well. And I think the first thing to say is that partnership is not one-dimensional. It isn't a number of bilateral conversations that happily get you to a destination. It really has to be, multi-dimensional. And we've got in Slough, when I came here, this really strong sense of partnership that's been growing for many, many years. So, we've got strong partnership with our voluntary sector, and, by goodness, they've stepped up during the pandemic. We've got strong partnerships across our safeguarding groups. So we're working really, really strongly with our NHS colleagues and our children's social care colleagues who are in a trust in Slough. We're working really strongly across areas such as violence and serious violence. So, there's nothing and no one who can solve something like serious violence and knife crime on their own. So again, we're working in partnership across that area. But I also just wanted to say that, Slough has become particularly well renowned for some of its partnerships in a commercial entity as well. So for quite a few years now, we've been in partnership with Morgan Sindall, and we've got a joint venture which is called Slough Urban Renewal. And this is sort of taking the best of both worlds, the sort of commercial savviness of an investment qualities of Morgan Sindall, putting those together with the land holdings of Slough and our real strong desire to shape a place, and putting it together in a company that is now delivering huge regeneration projects across Slough, the latest of which is, funnily enough, we own 2 hotels just opposite our offices here. And that partnership has gone from strength to strength and has really enabled us to deliver. So just a few partnerships, but what we're trying to do at the moment, and this is where, how we shape place and how we manage places as leaders is really important, is the evolution of those partnerships has happened in bits and pieces across the place. And with the devolution agenda and some, in fact, we know the NHS white paper is being put before Parliament today. It's increasingly important that we bring some stronger structure to some of those partnerships. So evolution is good, but we need to be bringing some stronger structure to that so that we can collectively understand what the needs are in place, and we can collectively, with our community, understand what the interventions are to be able to meet those needs collectively as a partnership. And so very recently, we've been working with our other leaders across Slough collectively as a collaborative to bring some of that together within a vision to be able to drive some of that.
Thanks, Josie. And I guess you and I have talked about this previously, but what are your observations around the impact of working together with partners around COVID-19, and what impact has that had on those relationships and those partnerships over the past 12 months?
Well, I don't think there'd be anybody probably in the country who hasn't said that the pandemic has only enhanced partnership working. There'll be very few, I think, across the country, and it's not dissimilar in Slough as well. our voluntary sector has just occupied a space that, you know, pre-pandemic we would never have envisaged at all, and stepping up. It's just not stopped. And the evolution of the One Slough, we've got a One Slough branding, which isn't structured. It's just what we do collectively here in Slough with our voluntary sector partners has emerged during that, and those partnerships. We've got to bottle those somehow and make sure that moving forward we don't lose sight of what's happened with those very strong partnerships. So that's one area, which is the voluntary sector. But equally, you know, the other week, those of us on the call who will remember that sort of time just shortly after Christmas when we were playing the hokey cokey in terms of schools opening and not opening. So, you know, again, head teachers, you know, on a call with head teachers, fantastic, ready to sort of step into that space. You know, the coordinated approach again across the town has been fantastic. And I think what's happened during the pandemic is that with that evolution of strong partnership, what we've been able to do is just build on that. Had those partnerships not been there, we would have been faced with starting to build those relationships right from the beginning. But in actual fact, what's happened is we've just immediately been able to step up on those partnerships. And it's, you know, there are some positives that have come out of this pandemic, not many, but some of those strengthened partnerships are definitely one of them.
Thanks, Josie. Nick, what impact from your perspective do you think COVID-19 has had on partnership working?
Well, I mean, it's and hello all, and you know, thanks so much to you all for joining. Yeah, just kind of building on, I guess, Josie's point there. Partnership working is essential in this, and kind of in some ways, the crises like COVID help to bring out the kind of sense of flexibility that we all need. And you know, I think when I think about place leadership, I definitely think of it in terms of soft borders and soft edges, and organizations thinking really knowing their core but being really flexible around how they can work together around, you know, a common purpose for the place, or several common purposes. And I think you can see that that's how organizations have got through COVID, because you've had to kind of be flexible, you've had to be able to kind of adapt around the edges, not, you know, process sometimes has to take a backdrop to immediate imperative, and consequently you kind of see the best of people's flexibility, and I think there's something to, you know, kind of bottle and learn from that can maybe apply more generally going forward. You know, it shouldn't need, you can see it even in some of the changes happening in the health sector around the way the health sector is now thinking differently about discharges, that actually there's a more flexible mindset that if we can take forward post pandemic, I think place will be in a stronger place for it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. So Josie, thinking about place leadership, how do you see your role as a place leader in Slough?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you know, place leadership again is not one dimensional, it's multi-dimensional, and I very much see my role and the role of Slough Borough Council as facilitator and enabler. We hold the democratic sort of responsibility and accountability within local government, that's for sure, but we don't hold all the answers, and neither should we. And I think, you know, I've over the years I've sort of debated this sort of long and hard, and you know, for those of us who are old enough to have sort of worked in when we had local strategic partnerships and when we were trying to develop, you know, community plans and all of those sorts of things, and one of the biggest barriers, and particularly when things like austerity kicks in, is that people kind of retract back into organisation, and not only do they retract back into organisation, but they reassert themselves as the centre of the universe. So what I mean by that is that if somebody, you know, works for a particular organisation, and I won't name anyone because we all do it, where we say we're the X organisation, how is everybody around us working to help us with our sort of, you know, the way that we manage? And you know, you've got somebody over there going, we're the organisation that's dealing with this, how is everybody working around us, you know, the solar system around us working for you know, for us? And I think you've got to just sort of kind of, you know, take that notion completely to one side, and you've got to say, actually, in a sense, it's a place that's the center of the universe, and how does everything and everyone coalesce around place? And, you know, sometimes that's very well defined. In Slough, it's really, really well defined because we're 7x3 and we're a strong geographical place. And, you know, so our contribution as a council will be something to that place. You know, Frimley will have a contribution to that place. Thames Valley Police will have a contribution to that place. So as a place leader, you know, it's not a command and control or a center of universe environment. It's facilitator, enabler to coalesce around the place as far as I'm concerned. And sometimes, you know, when you're working with different cultures of different organizations, that's quite an interesting dynamic. And sometimes when you've got a political leadership that has a particular view, that's an interesting dynamic. But the coalition of the willing is always the best foundation for those partnerships going forward.
Thanks, Josie. I'm loving your solar system references, considering you're in Observatory House as well.
I am in Observatory House, yes, thank you, yes.
So, Nick, I'd be interested in the kind of qualities based on what Josie said. What do you think makes a good place leader?
Yeah, and I was just, as Josie was talking, I was about to come in, you know, I always said customer and place centric, and you know, I hate the kind of jargon of customer centric because it's kind of got that, you know, I think it's quite tainted and it's been used so much and overused in the public sector. But I do think, you know, ultimately what we're talking about is placing the place and the individuals within the place at the heart of what public sector organisations, public sector partners with the private sector, with voluntary sector are coming together to do. So I think there's something about focus that then is really important, and that focus has to be outwards looking, and as Josie says, not rooted in my organisation is the centre of the universe. And to do that, I think there's definitely having that common view of the purpose that people can agree to. But I think also what that often then leads to, in my experience, is a conversation about scope, which is, therefore, I'm doing this thing and I'm going to do this thing. And people talk about activity and they think, what are the services and activities I'm going to do? Whereas rather than scope, I think it works better when people think about purpose and they think about the kind of influence that they can have. And it may be that influence, because different organizations do fundamentally have different purposes. And, you know, I think about work we're doing in one of our other projects with the witness service, where, you know, one of the points we're trying to help is the journey for witnesses through that. The police have an absolutely vital role, but sorry, it's the journey for victims, but the police have a role, but their relationship with the victim is also predicated on their role as a witness. And that creates a very different purpose to a purpose that is purely about care of the victim and the kind of support for them. And absolutely, the police need to play a role, but other organisations and indeed the victims themselves need to recognise that different people are coming from a different kind of purpose and influence. So I think if organisations work at their best in partnership, it's thinking less about what service do I offer, but thinking about what's my kind of purpose here and what's my relationship and ability to influence, and that kind of then comes back to some of those soft edges, because you may both kind of be involved in the same service but coming at it from a different way to kind of, you know, nudge and move individuals to the right kind of outcomes. And, you know, so much of this is ultimately about driving, you know, good place leadership is also about driving behavioural change for the individuals in the place. And that only comes when people have that kind of outward perspective and look at how they can play a role in influencing, but also see how their role may inadvertently undermine other organisations' roles. So the more people are open to a conversation about what role are you going to take? What role am I going to take? Rather than a conversation of, here's the services I'm going to deliver, leave me alone to deliver them, the more successful I think place leadership. I
really agree with that, Nick. And I think, you know, as public sector servants in particular, we need to start looking through different lenses. And you're right, you know, in a community, in a neighbourhood, in a place, whichever geography you want to take it to, we need to, particularly as public sector organisations, but of course there is a place for private sector as well, but particularly for public sector organisations, we absolutely need to have that collective understanding of needs and gaps within that geography. And then the lens that we look through is not, this is my traditional service, but how am I as an organisation best placed to contribute to any intervention or to bridging those gaps. And if you look through that lens, then you start looking at it from a different point of view. And what we've seen over the last, not just years, but probably decades, is treading on toes, is duplication, is gaps, where nobody's doing anything, because we've looked at this through a lens, which is, this is my organisation, this is what I'm statutorily obliged to do, and therefore that is what I'm going to deliver. And it has huge consequences, not least of which, the sort of the financial consequences of waste as well. So, this is not a new concept, but getting it right is always in the too difficult to do pile.
Do you think it takes a certain amount of, as you were talking to Josie, I was just thinking of the word that came into my head was brave, because there's so much for the public sector that is kind of, there's a statutory remit, and that's kind of, that's in law, and there are, there is a certain, sometimes, I don't want to be general here, but there is sometimes a kind of risk aversion, because there's a lot, there's a lot that can go wrong that you're trying to cover against, and I think there's a certain degree of bravery also that's required for people to go, actually, I recognise all those things, but given where I am, here's how me and my organisation, here's how we can best help this, and kind of we'll see the other things as minimum compliance, and then look at how we can step in. So I just wonder if that chimes for you at all in terms of that.
It completely chimes for us. I mean, take the notion of prevention, for example. Prevention, whatever prevention that is, whether it's people not escalating into social care, whether that's children's or adults, whether it's not people not escalating into crime, all of those things, the prevention agenda. Are we, as a local authority, statutorily obliged to deliver prevention? No, of course we're not. That's bonkers. But in terms of the whole place, it's in our best interest, not just for our own, financial sustainability, but it's in our best interest with our partners and the public pound. If you said there were to be a Slough pound, for example, it's absolutely in our best interest to invest some of our time and our energy right at the most local place to be able to prevent escalation into those services, because it's a win-win, isn't it? It's a win for those residents because their life is enhanced, and it's a win for the public purse because, the call on that later down the line. But statutorily, we're not obliged to do it, but we'd be bonkers not to.
Thanks, Josie. Thanks, Nick. That's really interesting. I think we've talked a lot there around kind of the benefits of working together as a place. I'd be interested, Josie, in your view first on what you think the barriers are to kind of that place-based way of working, and how sometimes perhaps the way the system works doesn't facilitate some of that. I'd be interested in your views on the barriers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the barriers are mostly structural and financial. And, again, I reference back to Total Place. It was a really big policy push, and it just got stuck time and time again in the too difficult to do pile. And what I think in terms of barriers, so you look at all the different public sector partners that are working, and I'm not saying that this is an insurmountable problem, but in Slough, you've got Slough Borough Council, which is the fixed kind of space for our geography. We've got Thames Valley Police, where they're working across, as the name suggests, Thames Valley. We've got the Frimley Trust, which works across Wexham Park, Frimley, and Heatherdean. I always forget the name of the third one. I'm sure if Neil's or Danny are on the call, they'll correct me. So you've got a system working that way. We've got schools, and I know we've probably got a couple of head teachers on the call today, but schools who are partly within the sort of management and local authority run schools, and then some that are academies. And even across that range, you've got pupils who are coming in from outside of Slough, and then pupils going outside. So the responsibility of schools, stretches beyond the boundaries. So just to name a few, those are issues where systems work across geographical boundaries, and therefore, if you want to use the term command and control, you've got different pressures and different calls on those systems to be able to do different things across system. And I think that's an issue. But the more, and increasingly, the more that you can sort of bring stuff back to place and understand how that can work. If place is default, this is how it works at default, and anything that can't do that for financial reasons or structural reasons becomes system, then I think you start to again look through a different lens on that. But those are barriers, but they're not insurmountable. We're working within our ICS at the moment, and there's a strong desire to try and move into a space where place is the local orientation. Of course, managing across system is hugely complex and hugely, demanding. But actually, the more that we can bring it back to that local area of need and understanding that, and delivery and commissioning being at that local place, the better, really.
Thanks, Josie. Nick, what are your perspectives on some of the barriers?
I think I'd absolutely echo the structural one as the largest. I think there's a piece there that is also the desire to, even then when we talk about place, overstructure what we mean by place, because really we're talking about common geographic areas in which populations move and congregate and fundamentally define themselves against. And having worked a lot in the health sector, one of the things that was interesting when the kind of STP world, that first came around, was the definition of some of the STPs became very fixed and rigid around certain sizes rather than movements, and rather than being really around the right population. And then we got really defined into, I have a statutory remit against this geography. I mean, one of the spaces I worked was Hertfordshire and West Essex. And that combined 3 fundamentally different geographies that all worked in different places. North Herts that pointed towards Cambridgeshire from a health perspective, West Essex that pointed towards Harlow and down into North East London, and the kind of Watford and West Hertfordshire that pointed into Northwest London. And actually, you ended up with this place, and it was all about place, but it was the wrong place. So there's something there about when, that in some ways that's a really trivial example, but to me it's that when we start doing these things, that we want to minimize the amount of structure, we want to minimize the amount of definition, we need to just give the right organizations the freedom in order to then come together around the right populations, rather than over define it. And I think whenever, and I totally understand the drive for kind of ministers who are under pressure and Whitehall down, but when things get over-defined at the top, you take away the autonomy of the organisations to work together. So there's something, it's not just about changing structures, but it's having less structure and having more kind of just, and that in turn requires trust. And there's certainly some kind of, while structure's the problem, there's some stuff underpinning that that's maybe a bit deeper that I guess points to things like trust.
Yeah. Agreed.
Thanks, Nick. I'm conscious we've got 6 questions popping in the Q&A. We've got one final question for Josie around the 2040 vision, Josie, which we've been working on quite closely with you on. Could you just tell us more about the 2040 vision and this is coming together?
Yes, I can. I mean, and this was really about understanding, for Slough, it began its life pre-COVID, and it's kind of finishing, or it's sort of ending its sort of evolution in terms of an actual vision post-COVID, and in fact it's grown even more important as we move into sort of recovery mode around COVID. But yes, I mean, this was about saying actually if you think about that inclusive growth strategy that I referenced earlier on, this town and many other places across country, but we're talking about Slough for now. This town has got so much opportunity around investment, around improving health outcomes, around improving the economy, all of those sorts of things. So much opportunity. But we were very fixed into working at the council, at least within a sort of a 5-year plan. And what we wanted to do was, Nick mentioned a common purpose earlier on when he was referencing one of his answers. And in order to sort of generate some of that sort of, sense of collaboration at place, we needed to develop that sense of vision collectively as a partnership across the town. And so we're hoping to launch that in the spring, and we've been working really hard with place leaders to develop that across a whole range of different areas. And we've engaged with, harder to reach groups all through pandemic, I should say, young people, different partners, community representatives, residents, old, young, all sorts of people, to try and understand that bit about need, and then that little bit about desire and ambition, and bring that all together into a space which tries to outline what this town will be and what it will become in 20 years' time, or 19 now, by 2040. And that way, as individual organisations, we can share that vision or that common purpose, because we know what we're working towards, and then we can chunk it back down. So we can take it away as our organisations, and we can say, actually, we're Slough Borough Council. We've collectively worked with our partners on this 2040 vision, and it looks brilliant. What's our contribution to that over the next 20 years? What does that look like in the next 3 to 5 years? What does that look like in 10 years? What does that look like in 15 years? And what are we as an organisation going to be doing to contribute that to meet those needs and those ambitions for the town as well? So that's what we've been doing. Really, really excited about it. Again, it's not new, but I think the way that we're doing it here is different and quite visionary in what we're doing. And it will make the best of that opportunity, hopefully.
Thanks, Josie. And thanks, Nick. So that's the end of our set questions. And I think there's been quite a few interesting themes that have been surfaced through what we've been discussing. So if we can open the virtual floor to Q&A, you'll see that we've got a Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. So if you want to submit your questions on there, that would be wonderful. We've already got a couple of questions in, so let's just have a look at what we've already got on there. I think there's one that I've just seen around how you found changing the cultural mindset to see place at the centre of the solar system rather than the organisation. So how have you found that experience? Josie, did you want to start off with that one?
Yeah, it's interesting because, and especially when you are a political organisation as well, because, some politicians, not all politicians, but some think that, in many public sector organisations, there's a democratic deficit. So feel that there's that assumed right to sort of be that sort of place leader. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily, that's happens in every single space. And the difference is, what we have to do is we have to take, there are some democratic responsibilities and there is that accountability. But even with that, we have to take that step back, and part of understanding that place leadership is knowing that is an enabling function and taking that step back. So it's a great question, and I think most of this battle is not structural, it is cultural. And the sooner, and the more quickly that you can start getting people into that space of having that shared vision, because we collectively understand need and we collectively have a desire to meet that need, the quicker you shift that culture. But it's in some parts it's racing ahead at 100 miles an hour, and in others it's kind of dragging it a little bit. So our job is to sort of, make the people who are lagging behind catch up a little bit.
I think just a kind of observation on this as well is that it's hard to culturally change others' mindsets and create all the culture. The thing I reflect is that actually the mindset shift I think we're looking for, and that you're describing, Josie, is also the mindset shift that organisations internally need as well. Because even if you're just have a clear remit and are delivering a service, that service still needs to be end to end, and often will involve multiple bits of your organisation. And when that's successful, service focus involves individuals not going, here's my job, here's my silo, I'm doing these tasks, but involves going, what's the end to end? How can I help make that happen?
Exactly.
And I think if you can if organizations can breed that service culture and that service mindset about end to end, that makes it easier then for leaders to themselves take that position and collectively. So, you know, I think at all levels, it's about up and out rather than down and detail. You know, that would be kind of my reflection about it. But yeah, culture is,
yeah.
You know, in so much of the change that we see, culture does come down to culture.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, one of our jobs, you know, as you know, we've been working on, you know, restructuring our whole organisation, transforming our whole organisation, which isn't just about restructure. But one of the things that I feel, you know, that will have a really significant impact on culture is if as people are coming into our organisation, you know, our induction includes not just coming into our organisation because you're going to do customer service, or you're going to be a social worker on the front line, or you're going to be an engineer attending to roads. You come into our organisation and you know that you are creating lives for people within their organisation. You're building roads because that makes it better, and or you're trying to encourage people onto public transport because that's having an impact on air quality. And our induction is about to lift people's space up above what their actual day-to-day functional tasks are, and understand what they're contributing to, which is that bigger outcome for Slough. And if we can get that through an induction programme, through our cultural programme, but not just as an organisation, but as partners, then you start to create something that's very, very different in an organisation and across the partnership, I think.
Thanks, Josie. Thanks, Nick. So we've touched there kind of that cultural sense. We've got another question here, which is, I understand the leadership aspect in that if you lead, follow, but how as a leadership collective do you engage citizens so they can truly influence and be part of the change? So that's more about how you bring citizens to be part of that and to share some of that. So Josie and Nick, what are your thoughts on that question around that element of kind of citizen engagement?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because I think when we talk about citizens and when we talk about population and we talk about customer centric, like there's no one group, you know, there's no one representative, and wouldn't it be so easy if there was just, you know, the representative citizen that you could then talk to and engage? You know, you're talking about, you know, population groups of, you know, maybe 1 million, 500,000, 1 million here or there, you know, and those are, you know, 500,000, 1 million different individuals, all with different views, all with different needs. And so kind of understanding, I suppose, the extent to which you can understand some of the different segments, some of the different types of drivers, and some of the different needs that people are facing, and not just from a kind of immediate service need, but kind of longer term need, and then find routes, different channels and routes for them to engage. But, you know, that's a really vanilla answer. Like I can't, you know, it's really difficult, and it's so easy to revert to the kind of noisy, you know, people at the margins who are, you know, who have the loudest voice, but they may not be representative. So I just think there's something about Agile, about getting in and not kind of setting up into this rigid structure with this group. It's finding multiple routes and seeing it as an ecosystem of just whatever routes you can get to contact, having, you know, using those, and then hoping that you can, those routes and points of contact are all driving to the same outcome, because people understand the influence that they're having, the role that they play, and consequently their interactions with those citizens help to move things in the right direction. But yeah, sorry, that's that. I feel like I've given a quite kind of motherhood and apple pie answer.
Yeah, I mean, and it's very easy to slip into that motherhood and apple pie answer, because you know, we are so good at doing that in public service. So, you know, some of us might remember citizens panels. You know, there was this great initiative that we were going to get, you know, all of these people, and you know, once a month we were going to send out, you know, to a representative sample of people, you know, several questions about customer service, and they were going to duly and dutifully return their questionnaire, you know, regularly, and tell us their answers. And of course, what happens is people self-select. It is those people who shout the loudest because they're automatically self-selecting, and then, you know, usually, you know, after their 12th kind of rather anodyne questionnaire that pops through the post, you know, they sort of go, do you know what, this isn't really for me, and I don't get a Waitrose voucher at the end of it, so I'm not really going to do that. So I think that's one area. The other area that we've been very good at, and when I was at Wokingham, and I noticed that there were a couple of ex-colleagues from Wokingham on the call this morning, but we used to really score massive own goals around engagement, particularly around planning. So, you know, we used to go to sort of frosty, chilly, you know, village halls on cold February evenings and stand in front of a baying mob who didn't really want development in their area, and then wonder why we all came away bruised and slightly shattered after the experience. But I think, you know, and those things are all good because they're engagement, but they aren't the panacea. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do in Slough, and again, many local authorities across the country doing this, it's not unique to Slough, but it feels quite passionate for us, is move into that localities space. So that you're doing with, not doing to, becomes your sort of, you know, raison d'etre. You know, that's exactly what you're doing. You're knowing your communities, you're understanding your hard to reach groups in those communities collectively as partnerships. You're not all individually sending in your questionnaire to find out something that's going on, because that's what you just do in your localities together with your partners. You understand and you work with. And I think if we can make that localities piece, the sophisticated piece that I know it can be, that's where we get the engagement, and that's where we understand our place as leaders of place.
And just two reflections on that. I'm conscious of time, but I think one is that kind of my takeaway from that, Josie, is that there's something about you don't view engagement as something separate. Like, what's our engagement route? You engage with your citizens the whole time by virtue of the services you deliver and the interactions you have. Exactly. So it's using service delivery as a mechanism for engagement. And just my other kind of reflection is, I think one of the challenges often in this space is a lot of the stuff the public sector does, people are interacting because it's not desired, it's to fix a problem or because something's gone wrong. And so it is always there's that kind of hurdle to overcome. You know, no one wants to pay council tax. No one, you know, wants to be a victim of crime. You know, there's a lots of points. No one wants to be unwell. And so there are lots of points where your interaction starts from an exit point. And I do wonder, therefore, if there's a thought about purpose, which is, where are the points of interaction that are starting from a positive place? Yeah. And how do we use those to build on? I think, you know, and then education probably plays an important role in that, because that is a, you know, inherently generally positive as the starting point. So I think that there might be a kind of role of education as one of the vehicles for that. But that's definitely just a reflection on what you're saying.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, brilliant. I'm conscious of time, so let's leave it there. We've covered a lot of ground over the past kind of 45 minutes. Just been jotting down a few points there. So none of this is new. It's just really hard sometimes. And thinking about kind of place very much as multidimensional. It's about shared ambition, and it's about having a common purpose. And we all touched on some of those barriers around structural barriers and also the financial barriers, but none of those often insurmountable. And I think what we've also around is that importance of the locality approach, and how once you've got that locality approach, you can look at what the collective insight really get into that understanding of the needs of particular communities. So we've covered a lot of ground over the last 45 minutes, and we will be sending out some takeaways via email, and we'll keep you updated on further, I think, beyond sessions that will be scheduling over the course of this year. So a big thank you to Josie and Nick for being on our panel, and a bigger thank you to our participants for joining us, and also for all of your questions. Have a really great afternoon, and goodbye. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.